how do we catch up on the supply of childcare to what we know is an immense gap so that mothers can feel more comfortable working and advancing with their employment and earning opportunities, knowing at the same time that their children are being cared for.
We had less than 40% of women who have children of preschool age who are economically active.
The opportunity with Moldova is actually that by turning a couple of keys, you can actually transform a country.
Welcome back to African. Today, under our Scaling Up theme, we are looking at what I consider to be one of the most successful scale-ups of an early childhood education program and how it was turned into a national priority. When Russia invaded Ukraine, large numbers of Ukrainian families sought refuge in Moldova. Now, 1 in 8 children in Moldova is a Ukrainian refugee. And out of 47,632 refugee children, only 3% are in general education. To address the educational consequences of this forced exile, Street Child launched an initiative aimed at providing early education for refugee learners in partnership with the Moldovan Ministry of Labor and Social Protection and 2 local-level organizations, the Center for Early Intervention and Step by Step Moldova. So far, they have opened 5 nurseries to support young learners ages 0 to 3. Now, beyond the impact on the children, the systemic implications of this intervention are many. It doesn't take a randomized controlled trial to figure out that access to early learning also increases the scope for mothers' labor force participation, and we will discuss the evidence which the Street Child program has provided on this. The IMF's fiscal multiplier for childcare investment ranges from 1 to 2, which means that for every dollar invested in childcare, the overall economic impact could be between $1 and $2 due to increased employment, higher tax revenue, and other positive effects. From Federal Foundation's perspective, our third mission is to remove obstacles to productivity and employment. And bringing women into the labor force is an obvious way of adding half of the population into employment and ultimately boosting growth. We can leverage the 17 early childhood education centers we have in Somaliland from a productivity and employment perspective, as they can yield economic and social impact at scale, above and beyond their impact on education. In this more systemic perspective, the central question becomes, how can we facilitate the extra step that a woman needs to take to actually enter the labor force? So with us today, we have Mihaela Iurascu, who is the coordinator of the National Program on Childcare at the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection of Moldova. Since 2023, Mihaela supports the ministry in the provision of public and alternative childcare services for children aged 0 to 3, as well as the coordination with government institutions and other international and national entities. Previously, for more than 10 years, she worked in the field of non-formal education for young people focused on digital literacy, labor market placement in the ICT sector, and girls and women economic empowerment. Our second guest is Ramya Madhavan, who is the Global Head of Advisory for Street Child, an organization which supports children's safety and education in low-resource environments and emergencies across 25-plus countries in Eastern Europe, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Ramya has over 10 years of experience in education policy and programs with a specialization in education in emergencies. Her recent experience includes establishing evidence for learning and leading impact investments in education for social ventures. So my first question is sort of to Mihaela and Ramya, really. I remember when I heard the Moldovan Minister of Labor and Social Protection, Minister Buzu, speaking about the success of the Street Child program. And he said, nothing replaces political will. We need government in the room. So how does the program tie into the Moldovan government's 2030 education strategy? Specifically, how did you manage to turn this program from a great nonprofit initiative into the pivot of a national education strategy? Which, by the way, is something that Pharaoh Foundation is trying to do with its early childhood education centers in Somaliland. So we're very curious to hear from you both.
Well, thank you, Francesca, first of all, for the opportunity we have today. We are always very happy and grateful to be invited to discuss about our work, not only in Moldova, our work as Street Child generally. And why not? We do believe today we will touch upon various ideas, models, or topics that are very relevant to across other countries, across other realities. So I hope that whoever listens to us today can take upon and really support and implement something of success within their current realities. To talk about Street Child and how we positioned ourselves right from the beginning, I think it already says a lot from my own role that I do have at the moment, supporting with the coordination of the national program and sitting with the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, but being the program manager for Moldova for Street Child. So it already describes how Street Child saw and wanted to brand their work in Moldova as a government program. So when we first came to Moldova in 2023, and when we had our initial conversations with the government, we didn't really come with a very clear set program paper, and we knew that this is how we're going to implement it. We rather came to initiate a dialogue with the government to try and see what is the government's view on how to address the Ukrainian refugee crisis in Moldova, and whether there are or there's a vision related to early childhood education. Luckily, we did saw both a political will, but also a vision from the government of Moldova. What we saw is that the government really wanted to have a central and national program for early childhood education. But also we understood from the perspective of the government of Moldova that the method and the ways to address the refugee crisis is to really have an equality principle for both Moldovan and Ukrainian children, meaning that there will be programs, strategies developed for all families and all children that are currently in Moldova. And this is how we started the exercise between Street Child and the government of Moldova to actually develop what we call now the national program on childcare in Moldova for the years 2023-2026. The national program does sit with the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, and this is also an important aspect because we do not only look at the children's development and enrollment into the public or private systems, but we do look at it from the angles of women economic empowerment, families economic empowerment in general. And yes, as the Minister of Labor and Social Protection in Moldova always presents, is that there's a theory of childcare, which is a theory of childcare of everything, meaning that once childcare provision is in place, it actually supports families and it does influence positively many aspects of the family and then, of course, the society in general. So as Street Child, going back at our role, we did position ourselves as someone that will support the Minister of Labor and Social Protection with the coordination of the national program. I will speak more of it as we go, but the national program does have a steering committee comprised of both government entities relevant to childcare and women economic empowerment, but also other development organizations, and nonetheless LPAs, local public authorities, and local organizations that work in this area. So we did support and continue to support the coordination of this steering committee, which also deals a lot with policy development and advocacy for investments in childcare. And we will also talk about how those efforts of advocacy did help in Moldova, and those constant efforts made that childcare does have a special place in the government's agenda. So yeah, this would be in general, and happy to go into further more specific details as we go.
Yeah, and I actually think to add on to what Mihaela said, but I think maybe 3 key points to add on top is that we initially were not active in Eastern Europe. We're primarily an organization focused on South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, but we did launch a response as an education and emergencies responder to the crisis in Ukraine within 24 hours of the Russian invasion. And in the months that succeeded that, we were exploring what it is we might be able to do to support Ukrainian refugees primarily as the primary beneficiary in countries that were hosting refugees. What was for us very interesting when we came to Moldova, and perhaps the second point, is that we were not previously a childcare actor. We are fundamentally a primary age actor. But when we came to Moldova and when the government presented to us the case around childcare, which was part of their broader agenda for Moldova, it took, I think, a degree of flexibility and reflection to understand that, first and foremost, the theory of change for education in emergencies does not necessarily rely only on targeting populations that have been affected by the emergencies, so in this case, the Ukrainian populations, but being able to build resilient systems in the neighborhoods of those emergencies, which then contribute to those countries being able to cooperate with, withstand, and indeed support the recovery and resilience of the country that is undergoing the emergency. And so that kind of thinking, I think, really strengthened our commitment to Moldova and Moldovans, and understanding that the more we could do to support Moldova in its incredible generosity with how it has hosted Ukrainian refugees over the last couple of years, in spite of being quite low resourced itself. And I think that, again, speaks positively to the incredible will and vision that the government has had for the country. It required that, I think that kind of degree of flexibility, both from us and certainly from our funders, to be able to say, this is actually something we think would have a massively positive impact on the problem we're trying to work towards, which is the issue of Ukrainians being affected. Secondly, I think the issue of childcare, which we hadn't previously worked in, required a reflection saying, what do we really care about and what are the capabilities we have? We fundamentally work on children being safe, we work on children being in school, and we work on children learning. And whilst we have the capabilities and the capacities to do that in the primary space, how is it that, one, we can adapt our own capabilities to support 0 to 3-year-olds, but 2, who can we tap into in country that is potentially already doing this work? And as we go on, I'm sure Mihaela will talk in more detail about the incredible group of local partners that we were able to reach out to and bring together into our consortium, but then also to go back to government and understand that this was a conversation they were having with so many different actors, and to say, what is the role we could play as a convener in bringing these actors to the table, in being able to create that joint up agenda. And crucially for us, we were keen that the money being brought into the country, both from within Moldovan budgets, but also from aid budgets, was being coordinated and most effectively and efficiently spent in order to advance this particular agenda. And even in our early days, we could see the sparks of some duplication and some gaps. And so bringing everyone to the table, convening them under the umbrella of the national program and the National Steering Committee was a very intentional step to attempt to avoid that from sort of growing as the really compelling thing about Moldova for us. And I think, when we come from countries where we operate at the kind of scale that is very daunting, and this is something that Minister Alexei Buzu says far more elegantly than I will, the opportunity with Moldova is actually that by turning a couple of keys, you can actually transform a country. And I think the government operates with that sense of possibility. It's a very young government. It's a very hopeful kind of government. And in many ways, it's been a delight for us to work with them and to think, how do we replicate this in other parts of the world? How do we replicate that same sense of possibility, move past, I think, the cynicism that affects us in some of the other parts that we work in, given the complexities and the compounded challenges that governments are dealing with us there. But it does mean that we're able to see that even those small steps, those small drops can be leveraged into something that really can be transformative for a country. And we're really excited about that. And we really hope we can see that happen in other places as well.
Very interesting, Rami. Actually, what you said about Moldova is very similar to Somaliland in many ways. It's got that similar sort of energy and also a capacity for huge impact because it is small and it just works like this. So very interesting to hear that. Makes me hopeful as well in terms of what we do. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that fantastic introductory setting of the program and yeah, just explaining what the key points were. Another thing that the minister said at this talk that I met Mihaela at was that he said child poverty is like a fire that nobody has seen. And he emphasized the role of continuous data gathering as being the key to moving the needle at a political level. So I'm really quite interested to hear from you both, really, about which data you think was critical to get the program across the political line, and how you managed to leverage it.
I might actually start us off here, if that's okay, Mihaela, and I'll pass to you for the detail. I think what's been fascinating from an internal perspective about this program for us has been the simplicity of the data. That there are no complex log frames, there is no complicated analysis, there are no randomized control trials, as you said, but a very, very simple structure of how many children don't currently have access, how many children need access, and how are we creating pathways for that access. And we are very much trying to look at this through the lens of, and I thought you brought this through beautifully in your introduction, through the lens of a return on investment, right? So for each child that we can create a safe, secure care environment for, what are then the far greater familial and social impacts that can generate? And we've spent a lot more time qualitatively and also kind of quantifying the financial returns that this kind of investment could have in order to then be able to present those financial returns to our stakeholders to then kind of gather their investment. And I'll pass to Mihaela to talk about that, but especially to therefore talk about how the simplicity of the data and the orientation towards that multiplier effect of childcare has in fact helped us leverage funding in a way that we have seldom been able to do before. And I do think quite a lot of that is attributable to that simplicity. So Mihaela, I'll let you take that away.
Yeah, thanks, Ramya. It's actually very true. I think the main baseline data that the national program itself has and what we operate with is rate of enrollment of children into childcare. And before the program started, we had a bit less than 15% of children aged 0 to 3 who are enrolled in a childcare system, whether it is public or private provision of it. And also we had less than 40% of women who have children of preschool age who are economically active. So those two numbers already do build the case of and the main hypothesis of the national program that the delivery of childcare services would support also women economic participation. And those are the central data. And as I mentioned before, when we speak about children in Moldova, we do talk about both Ukrainian refugee children and Moldovan children. From many aspects, the refugees crisis in Moldova is a unique type of crisis, I would say. We do have a high rate of mobility of the refugee population. We do have a high rate of families who, if possible, would travel across the border more often than compared to a regular setting. We do also have a higher motivation of the Ukrainian government to encourage online learning and still want to support as much as they can the Ukrainian population, which is something that is great in terms of support for Ukrainian population, but also it's an added effort to really target specifically the Ukrainian families and really create a very suitable setting for them to integrate into childcare and also into schools. I think we've mentioned already that we do have an equality principle in terms of addressing the needs of families. We do also understand that the vast majority of Ukrainian children, refugees, have traveled to Moldova with their mothers specifically, and a lot of those efforts have to be hand in hand with the possibility for mothers to work, which would also open up the possibility for them to whether provide, if it's for their children to be integrated, if it's a private provision, but also if their children will be integrated into the public system, to be able to be economically active and sustain themselves while they do hold the status of refugees. So it does come hand in hand. As Street Child within the national program, we did work with closely with UNHCR and UNICEF to be able to centralize as much as possible the ways that we do address the needs of the refugee population, the way we target as much as we can the refugee population, and in order to really, as Ramya mentioned before, to really avoid doubling efforts and really trying to make them as efficient as possible. As Street Child, that's why we also, it was the main reasoning for us to support the family type creche provision as a way of targeting the refugee population communities, smaller communities, being able to provide a model that is more comforting in terms of peace and safety for their children, that mothers would rather trust more, having a setting where there's a maximum number of 5 children into a home setting. It did provide a lot of additional comfort and support that they were looking for. So having those models also developed to really cater as much as possible the vast diversity of needs of both Moldovan and Ukrainian population.
Absolutely.
Maybe just to add 2 or 3 points on that data piece as well, Francesca. I think in addition to that, keeping it simple, and as Mihaela said, really ensuring that we've got the coordination with the right groups to ensure that the data is centralized and that we aren't duplicating or creating gaps. 3 things that I think have been really helpful to us. One is just, again, the closeness to the ministry means the closeness to their data collection sources. And so we're continually able to gather data from them. The Secretary of State at the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, for example, is a data wizard who is consistently kind of feeding us what the ministry is seeing and helping us drive our decision-making on the basis of that data, but is also very open to seeing kind of discrepancies and understanding how those are emerging and what we'll do about them. 2, I think, is being able to actually present, and I want to say use data a little loosely here and say present information on what the program is learning back to the policymakers and politicians. We have some incredible champions for the program who are members of parliament. We have an incredible champion for the program who sits in the Ministry of Education, who is the Minister for Education, and incredible champions throughout the other line ministries who are continually, I think, looking for opportunities and creating opportunities to engage with us on what we're seeing through the program, what we're learning through the program. Mihaela very recently, for example, along with some of our other development partners like ILO, was at an event where we presented progress on the program to Parliament in a sort of public town hall style setting. And the kind of accountability that creates is, of course, invaluable. But the kind of engagement with the detail that creates at the highest levels, I think, has been really crucial to drive the success of the program. And in particular, and I'll kind of reiterate what we said at the start, that has been crucial to being able to pull resources, not just from outside, but from within government, and to be able to source budgets from across line ministries towards this national plan of action. And so as much as the data collection has been important and the simplicity has been important, the how the data has been communicated, where to whom, how often, is what has made for us, I think, the biggest difference in how we've been able to bring the program together and keep it going at quite a strong momentum.
Very interesting. It actually ties quite nicely with my next question, which has to do with, yes, the how you scale up also from a financial point of view when you have to make that case. So specifically, I am talking about the role of UBS Optimus, which I understand multiplied the program's financing power by 7 to scale up early childcare in Moldova. And, in your perspective, beyond the financial contribution, in what other ways has philanthropy, and specifically UBS Optimus, supported your initiative and added perhaps an extra dimension to it?
Right. Francesca, I'll just kick off by saying it's the other way around. So UBS came in as the catalytic funder, initially anticipating funding us for 1 year, but through the efforts of the national program and the coordination, we were able to multiply that money 7-fold from both internal and external sources, as a result of which that UBS funding has now continued to fund us for a 3rd year, because everything that we had forecasted allocating their funding for has been picked up through some other funding that has come through the door, which we hope has been an incredible success story for where philanthropy's agility, where philanthropy's appetite for risk. This was a program, as I said at the start, that hadn't been done previously. We were not a childcare actor. We'd never been in Moldova. Moldova wasn't even a priority country for UBS necessarily. They were, like us, focused on the Ukrainian refugee crisis. But the agility, the appetite for risk, and the ability to really partner with us, to move with us, and to regularly understand how the landscape was shifting and where opportunities were created, and therefore to adapt how we could use their funding, has absolutely for us as Street Child been the linchpin of why we've been able to do this and how it has been able to be as successful. Mihaela, perhaps you can describe then how that other funding has come through and the role that UBS continues to play in terms of helping us advocate as well.
Yes. Thanks, Ramya. It's really what I would say first is that it's actually the flexibility that UBS had in terms of the approach we took to Moldova and how the program was designed to become a national program on childcare. Is that really it's what supported the idea of how we would capitalize on those funding and be able to attract so much more, bringing all partners, both local entities, but also other organizations, development organizations in Moldova, being able to bring them under this common agenda is what actually supported to channelize more funding and have that I would call it rather successful ratio of funding, and from the main what is also important is that from the main funding flows is that it was also government, which is very important. It did play an initial role in terms of how we also advocated for childcare in terms of government investment. So in 2023, we had an approximate of €500,000 initial investment of government of Moldova, which is the first time since our independence that happened. Money directed straightly to provision of public childcare services, which then grew year by year, becoming 1 million in 2024, 1.5 million in 2025, and then across 2026 to 2027, for those 2 years, we have almost 20 million euros committed from the government of Moldova. So it really does create an effect where those funds are being multiplied, of course, from the government side, but also, as I mentioned, from the other development organizations. Because from the data that we collect at the national programs level, we do have approximately 3 million euros already invested from other development organizations. And for the last 2 years, we also had GPE supporting childcare with $5 million as part of a broader World Bank program in Moldova. So all those funds do contribute to that ratio, but also state again how various actors committed to this common agenda under the National Program on Childcare, which is both a great and challenging effort of coordination for us, but I think for the countries is only something that we benefit a lot from. And it is a successful way of how funds are channeled in order to really ensure maximum efficiency and effectiveness of funds invested and allocated. So from this point of view, I think the national program has already proved to be more successful than initially stated. And I think it's also what supported us to have this continuous conversation with UBS Optimus and being able to adapt the way the funding is being directed in order that it best serves the interests of the government's agenda, and it best serves the mission to really increase the rate of children who have access to childcare. And therefore, those constant dialogues have supported us. We do always, apart from data collection, we do always put a great effort into using the experience we have here to inform on the next decisions, or where it is better to channel the available funding to be able to whether bring more funding in, or at least if not, then at least be able to have a maximum of impact and a sustainable impact. We now know, and we've seen already that for the Moldova's development plan, which is called Moldova Growth Plan, for the next 2 years, childcare has a very important place there, with the mission of the government to expand at least 5,000 more new places in public and private provisions, which for Moldova would really bring very close to a rate of minimum 30% of children enrolled into childcare services, which would basically mean double than what we had when we started the program. And it does makes us very happy about that. Of course, we've spoken. I'll be happy to discuss more on the fact that it is not only the funding attracted that played a crucial role. The national program itself is also a group of entities who are very professional in what they do in Moldova, and not only. As Street Child, we did meet with a lot of the organizations that work in Moldova in the field of education or child protection. And we did establish two, as you've mentioned right from the introduction, two key partnerships in Moldova with the Center for Early Intervention, and also Step by Step. With the Center of Early Intervention, we've helped bring education programs and capacity development programs for all private service provision providers that we've supported as Street Child, but also with training for all educators from the public creches that were launched with the support of Street Child or other partners. And with Step by Step, who is an organization central in terms of pedagogical support for educators in Moldova, and developing curriculums child-centered for all ages, actually, but with our support for ages specifically 0 to 3, we've encouraged the development of a curriculum of such, a curriculum that is now being delivered in terms of training for all educators in all public creches that were expanded in Moldova. Here we talk, it's a number of about 500 educators across the country, which is one of the biggest efforts in terms of capacity development that we've seen until now for this specific groups 0 to 3. and we are very excited about that. So here's to say that from the local level organizations to the government level, everybody plays a very important role, whether it is in terms of funding or bringing in more funds for the sector, or to deliver the program itself and to deliver the services itself and ensure that those services would be sustainable, and capacity development would be also in place.
Excellent. Thank you for such detailed answers. I mean, you're just really giving us so much precious information. It's fascinating. Okay, well, we really have covered a lot of ground already, so I think I'm going to move on to my final question, which is going to be on replication, really. So clearly, lessons from Moldova are in many ways representative of the challenges of early education in all emergencies. What aspects of the Moldovan experience in particular would you say are applicable to the African emergency context? I think it's mainly a question for Ramya, but Mihaela, of course, do chip in. And in particular, do you think there are any cultural dimensions in Africa that kind of change the nature of the challenges at work? And thinking through the question really of, is the provision of childcare enough to get women into work? I think that's one of the angles that I'd be very interested in hearing your views on, Ramya.
Yeah, pleased that you ended with that question, Francesca, because I from my understanding, and we were lucky enough to be at the Africa Union's conference on childcare in Addis earlier this year. The problem was almost the converse, that mothers are working and 1 in 3 children are being left at home alone, without care, unsafe, exposed, and in situations of emergency, of course, exposed to a very high level of hazard that has lifelong impacts on their growth. So in many ways for us in Africa, the question feels like, how do we catch up on the supply of childcare to what we know is an immense gap, so that mothers can feel more comfortable working and advancing with their employment and earning opportunities, knowing at the same time that their children are being cared for and that their developmental pathway is as rapid and as well supported as possible. We in Africa for us, and this is absolutely a question in Moldova as well, that the conversation around education and emergencies has so heavily focused on primary age children and to some extent ECE age children, that we would really love to shift the focus towards what happens to children age 0 and through, who are born into and looking to survive a crisis, who are pre-literate, pre-numerate, whose brains are still developing, whose bodies are still developing. And how do we really bring that conversation about children to the forefront and create a much, much, much stronger focus on the kind of services and support? So not just the childcare infrastructure and supply, but everything from the kind of educator capacitation to the curriculum, to the kind of services that are required to ensure that children can survive. And that naturally means that the program needs to, in a very serious and significant way, look at how we work with mothers and fathers and broader family groups to understand what childcare means in a much broader definitional sense, and then to kind of create the structures that are capable of delivering that. I think one of the real lessons from Moldova here has been the development of the multiplicity of models. So we have the individual type caregivers, the family caregivers, employment-based care, we have the public creches, and that kind of flexibility is certainly something that Africa is ripe for and is already developing so many different models of, that can be looked at and studied and scaled potentially. The second aspect of it that for us feels so important in Moldova, in Africa and even in Asia, is that school readiness piece, right? Where we as a primary actor see that so many children don't enroll at 6 years or 7 years of age, that are out of school, that are coming in overage, that are requiring really resource-intensive remediation programs. How can childcare bring the child into the system a lot earlier, give them the best chance of success in their first 1,000 days of life, and therefore ensure that they are in school when they should be starting school? And again, as we talked about with Moldova, the financial savings that are potentially inherent in something like this. I think people shy away from childcare sometimes because it feels expensive, right? You need beds and you need cots and you need food, and but the savings that are then acquired across the lifetime of a child's schooling, but then indeed in terms of the economic productivity that mothers generate immediately and fathers too, but then that the children themselves are able to generate as future citizens, I think need to be better studied, better understood, going back to your point on data, to really make the case for why Africa should first and foremost be looking at childcare as a priority. I wanted to actually just mention something that I only remembered as Mihaela was talking, because it was in the early days of when we were putting this program together and doing all the negotiations with government and the UBS Foundation. But we actually had in the kind of initial 3 months of assembling this program and speaking to UBS and ultimately securing the funding, a number of joint consultations between Street Child, UBS, and the government of Moldova, where UBS and the government sat together at the same table and discussed what this program would mean for both of their priorities. But what came out of those consultations was actually a commitment from government to match fund UBS's initial catalytic funding. So we had, if I remember right, and it was so long ago, it was something like a 1 to 4 or a 1 to 5 figures. So UBS would put in 80% of the funding, but the government would have to match every $4 with its own dollar. We all, dare I say openly on the podcast, sort of said, this isn't exactly a legally binding agreement. We'll see what happens. But I think that the principle of skin in the game, the principle of that shared commitment, that principle from the outset that this isn't just an NGO-run program. This is something that the government has directed us towards and the government is directly investing in, had a huge impact. And the figures that Mihaela shared in her response earlier, with the government dialing up its investment year on year on year. I'm sure the government has forgotten that paper exists. But the commitment has just continued to grow and grow and grow, and again, really justify the catalytic impact that the UBS funding has had and the kind of leverage ratio that it's been able to achieve through the lifetime of the program. So that is something when we come to contexts like Africa, Asia, Latin America, other parts of the world, is something we want to, and as you've started off by talking about your work in Somaliland, been reflecting throughout the conversation that what does it take to get the government to make that minimal investment at the start, but that generates that will, generates that buy-in, and ultimately gives them from the outset the ownership of the outcomes, which is of course the most significant driving factor that we all want to see. On the challenge side, of course, Africa's a lot bigger. The countries we're working with have much larger populations. In many cases, the government structures are also much more complex and much more diverse, and don't always agree with each other in the case of, more federalized states, for example. So the level of, I think we've been very lucky in Moldova to have the kind of level of coordination that Mihaela has described so beautifully, but we don't underestimate the challenge of what that takes in countries with many multiples of populations and many more ministries and kind of levels of ministry that require coordination with. However, we said at the start, what Moldova has given us is an enormous sense of possibility for what is possible. We're currently seeing some fantastic work coming out of Kenya and Uganda, for example. We're seeing some real bright sparks in places as complex and as challenging as the DRC. We ourselves are starting to explore what kind of childcare programming pilots we might look at. Countries like CAR, DRC is of immense interest to us as one of our largest programs at the moment, and also countries like Afghanistan, where there are only 137 childcare centers for a country of 42 million people, right? So the gap is enormous. But again, for something that maybe 3 years ago, we would have said, this isn't really something Street Child does. this isn't something that we think is possible. I think Moldova has really built a bridge for us internally and externally to say, no, absolutely, it is achievable, and it's achievable at a very ambitious scale. But what that takes is all these actors coming together, saying, we understand why this needs to happen. We understand the immense impact we know it will have. And we're seeing it have in other countries, and then being able to put their money where their mouths are, as they've done so effectively in Moldova. So yeah, we remain hopeful that the next time we have this conversation, we're seeing some really significant progress, as we already are in parts of Africa. But that this has, again, become such a core part of the agenda that everyone is talking about it as they are in Moldova today.
Absolutely amazing. I've really enjoyed this episode because, yeah, it gives us, you're right, a sense of possibility in areas that are very, very dear to the foundation. So thank you so much, both of you. It's been a great discussion.